Okay, hello. So it's March the 8th today. I'm pretty sure, anyways. And what can I say? It's the first day that I made an astrology video that with the planet Saturn in Pisces. And I had a lot of ideas. Last video I made I was talking about Marshall McLuhan, and I have a lot of ideas along those lines for this kind of stuff. I was talking a lot about technology and media and the Uranus Neptune kind of effects. And one of the things, though, that I realized in this process of making the last video, is that there's an important detail that I neglected to include, which was the perfect square to Mars in Gemini, which is, I have to admit, I was kind of had this idea reading Rick Tarnas and wanting to talk about the Uranus Neptune side of things. So the influence of, and which is the point though, was that it's not even like we're in a certain chapter of the cycle that's like the midway, like a sextile before the square, and it's not even that strong. And it was more of putting it into a context, which also it goes with Saturn also into Pisces and such. But the thing about Mars in Gemini, I basically neglected last video, so I wanted to bring that in. And when I was approaching the issue of how to understand the square to Mars, there are certain interesting things that came to mind. For example, the decan that Neptune is in a Mars decan. It's the last decan of Pisces, is the last decan of the zodiac before Aries, and there are these Mars decans, which introduce the new zodiac. So there's something about Neptune going through this place where Neptune is in, where we're going to be getting a Saturn and Neptune in Aries, right? And I have to admit though, I am a little bit uncomfortable. Well, whatever. I don't want to prognosticate too much doom and gloom and all this and scary stuff, but I also don't want to be like the dumb astrologer that didn't see it coming, when you can obviously, tell there's probably going to be some sort of issue with this Saturn Neptune conjunction, right? But I will just, and one of the things I didn't touch upon in the last video was some of the conflicts with Russia and Eastern Europe. But again, I don't want to. I just want to address that that's a thing going on, and in terms of transits and Mars and stuff like that, it's always Mars has to do with war, and it's always a issue with Mars, and especially the issue too. Unfortunately, is that a lot of with Russia, the weather is a factor, and then as soon as warm weather, the weather starts getting warmer. These people are the war is going to start up because they're not going to have the thaw. They're not going to have Saturn, the coldness of Saturn putting the brakes on it anymore. Right? Saturn is now in Pisces, though. Saturn's going to be coming with Neptune. Maybe, I don't know. There's something about the Korean War happened around the Saturn Neptune conjunction, right? I don't know. But again, I don't want to be too much of a bummer with my astrology, right? But that there's just part of looking at things, and I don't know. I have to admit though that I'm also I continually am going to not include my personal life in this video. And I may have, made some contact with some old friends and stuff like that, and, was checking out with some people, but I'm going to leave that out of this video because I want to leave the personal stuff out of it. And basically respect boundaries and stuff like this. And I think that's one thing I can mention with the Neptune and the Mars issue, is that primarily when you're looking at trying to understand this Neptune Mars square and what happens when these planets are in a square angle with each other, 90 degrees, seen as to be a conflicting kind of one of the more difficult dynamics. Although I was even talking about these Dean Rudyard perspectives, like there's no good or bad placements, but like, what are you going to say about a square if you're going to say that? But there's a certain, what can I say? The issue is highlighted around, on one hand, Mars is about cutting, separating, and the aggressiveness of Mars, whereas Neptune has been described as being the total opposite of that, being all about enveloping, or a kind of a unification, or a kind of like, the blissed out unity state or something, the spiritual union, or the or the other forms of that, which are maybe less evolved or whatever, right? But we should maybe like codependency issues or something as a kind of a lack of different. There's certain as a psychological principle of differentiation, right? So the psychological principle of differentiation is to say that we have different needs and we have different desires or whatever, and to look at each of these kinds of needs and differentiate them, and so that in an effort to sort of, this is a kind of a psychoanalytic thing that people want to sort of pinpoint what we need to do to help something out, or else at least there's certain people are in a state that's kind of mixed up and confused. If you're trying to emerge, like this is one of the things that I remember them saying in the astrology podcast, The Fog of War. There's a foggy quality to Neptune, is what I'm trying to say. There's a foggy, undifferentiated quality to Neptune that, to be honest, is sort of like when you also bring Saturn into the mix. I'm kind of was just had this inclination to just chill on these videos for a few days, even though I had some ideas, right? To just chill on it. And some of this, and so the thing of though is that in the process of chilling, you know, on these ideas, is that I could look through these ideas and kind of consider what of these do I actually want to put in my video, what do I actually want to put out there. And unfortunately, I don't even know what this video is going to end up being like. But this is the fogginess of Neptune. Unfortunately, I'm kind of going into this video with a foggy Neptunian idea of where I want to go with it. But there are certain things that I think that's relevant to the Mars dynamic that creates the more of a definition, right? And that creating the definition, I was reading a Byung-Chul Han book, and he was talking about territorial pissings, or like, you know how animals will scent or whatever, and he was talking about how one of the properties of this is that obviously urine is not something that smells very good. It's got a pretty, you know, characteristically, especially like if you think about also animals like dogs or even wild animals like a wolf or something, like, you know, a rank wolf piss probably smells terrible, right? It's probably one of the most, I can only imagine, not that I have much experience with this, but also, you know, like animals in heat, it doesn't smell very good, right? That's a quality of Mars. And I also think there's a point here, if we're looking at the whole gender thing, that I think there's a point to be made, because I was kind of thinking about the issue with the gender binary stuff, and when that gets mixed up with the archetypes in astrology. And I think to some extent, it's fair to say that with Venus and Mars, they're not really masculine or feminine planets at all, because for one, there's different ways you can categorize it. And if you look at diurnal and nocturnal, that Mars is actually on the nocturnal, is considered a nocturnal planet. But Venus and Mars are both nocturnal. Saturn and Jupiter are both diurnal. And if you went that way, it would mean that both Mars and Venus are relatively feminine compared to Jupiter and Saturn, right? And so there's a kind of, even in astrology, the traditional astrology, there's a kind of a relativity playing out at this level with the what we would call gender or whatever dynamics with planets. That even though Mars, typically we see Mars as being representative of the male warrior or something like this, there is Mars itself is I think there's a Marsy feminine that is not any less feminine because of the Marsiness. But then the thing is, Venus itself is not, you know, the tension between Venus and Mars, whatever, I don't know. Maybe I'm just getting caught up in a tangle with this one, right? But there's something where we typically associate something with Neptune, like to be like women harmonize and bring people together, and men are warriors and they go off and fight or something like this, right? And to differentiate, this is one of the problems about like the you know, heteronormative kind of essentialism in, like, you know, when you go back and read, like, there's something about Jungian stuff where I think there's an issue with trans stuff where I don't think people want to like. There's been a lot of problems with Jordan Peterson, obviously, around the trans issue, and I don't want to go in and inflame these areas, more than I need to or whatever. Because my whole thing is like I want to respect trans people, and I don't want to be a bigot, and I don't want to be like Jordan Peterson. But at the same time, there's something about the these are the kind of things I'm thinking about, right? That there's the Marsiness of this, even just an issue like this, if you think about controversial issues, right? And that if there's a tendency to poke hot button topics or something like this that are like to start fights or something, okay, now let's just get into the Gemini part of it. We've had this damn Mars and Gemini for 6 months or something like this. It's going to be 6 months when it's all, because we've had Mars retrograde in Gemini. It's last time we had Mars retrograde was in 2020. If you're right in the middle of when the pandemic first started. I mean, it's kind of funny, the middle of the beginning. It's been for a while, but at that first year of the pandemic, we had this Mars retrograde in Aries, right? And this is the next Mars retrograde after that, and it's in Gemini. And Aries is more about physical. Well, it doesn't have to be physical, but in my experience of Aries is more about get her done kind of thing, right? You just gotta, just do it, like Nike, right? Like you gotta do what you gotta do, and you gotta, handle the things and do the stuff and make it work or whatever, right? Whereas Gemini, being an air sign rather than a fire sign. Fire just wants to, let more action, less talk. It's like the Elvis song, a little less talk, a little more action. Let's just do the stuff. Shut up and do it. Okay, that's the fire attitude. Like, what are we faffing around? Let's just get her done. Whereas Gemini there's a discursive quality to Gemini that wants to chew the fat, that wants to talk, that wants to chit chat, and whether or not this idle dialogue actually is effective or not, it's still, that's kind of what Gemini does. And in Mars in Gemini, when you get to this final decan of Gemini, and I think it's also increased by the fact that we've had 6 damn months of Mars in Gemini. Okay, when my last video, I mentioned Adam Curtis documentary that just came out. I'm a bit late to it though, but it's called Trauma Zone. And I saw an interview with Adam Curtis talking about this most recent documentary. And one of the things that stands out about this one is that there's not very much narration in this documentary, which is actually kind of refreshing. It's like during a time when with Mars and Gemini, where the chatteriness and like I don't even know, for me it's almost maybe therapeutic to do these videos because it gives me an opportunity to just kind of like let this mercurial thing out, kind of thing. I just wanting to kind of have a discourse, when I have a dialogue, wanting to talk about things, wanting to sit down with an idea, and not just like, we've got 6 months of this, so might as well just let it like a snowball. Let's just build this bullshit up, even if it is bullshit. You know what I mean? Like maybe there's some gold nuggets to be found in this massive snowball somewhere, right? And we can sort that out later. But there's this sort of like just the whole Gemini thing of this, so much Mars and Gemini, just the massive bullshit Gemini storm going on. Well, it's not maybe they should be that harsh about it, right? But the point is that if you understand, I want to be harsh about using language like bullshit, but there's something about the people understand about the mind that I don't want to be an anti-intellectual, and I don't want to disparage the critical thinking and stuff like this, because I actually think it's important, right? I think it's important to one of the main points of this, why it's important to me to make videos where I'm not just going to say, well, let's just meditate and put aside politics because that's just a messy thing that will get me in trouble, and I don't, rather than trying to stoke the flames of controversy, I should just take an attitude of spiritual quietism and sit this one out. There's something about it where I'm just concerned that the whole thing about fascism and totalitarianism and the Nazis burned books and all this, the Nazis would be really happy if you just stopped reading all your books and you just meditated. Like Heidegger was a Nazi, right? And maybe Heidegger, I'm going to read some Heidegger, and there's a bit of tension. Like there's some way that you can make Heidegger really work with Buddhism, and that I've actually seen some people going around online like that, just because somebody is into Buddhism does not necessarily mean this person is somebody who you want to be. There's something about the criticism that, as much as there's also the controversies about people like Slavoj Zizek. This is another one that I kind of like. I'm talking about boundaries, right? Like maybe we can keep this issue of Slavoj Zizek out of here because it just makes it even worse. But like Zizek just said some shit about trans people recently. Man, maybe I should get into this one actually, because this is kind of what I'm talking about, right? Because it relates to a couple of things. I'm talking about the bullshit of discursive dialogue, that at some point in time, after you've had this much of this Gemini thing, you kind of get tired of hot takes. And what I was trying to get at with the Adam Curtis documentary is that he made this comment that he left all this discursive dialogue out, and he just let the images speak for themselves, because he intuited that we're at a time and we're just exhausted by like steaming hot takes, it's just that we see the limits of being like a talking head. And it's kind of funny, even the interview, like people like Tim Hiedecker do a great job of satirizing this kind of thing. I mean, it's kind of like the Stephen Colbert amped up to the next level of just the talking head media thing. And there's something, I also find it kind of surreal because I don't watch TV that much anymore, but this like the whole format of like TV newscasters and this kind of weird, it's a very specific kind of like reality kind of thing they're constructing to like put on this suit and tie and sit at the desk and present. It's obviously a kind of a performance that they put on, right? And it's like, well, I don't know, maybe I'm getting, but that's the kind of thing about Neptune, is like the illusion, right? When you put Neptune and you put Mars and Gemini, the discursive quality and the kind of illusory image, the Hollywood fantasy, right? And you put that together, you get the media spectacle that I was trying to get at with McLuhan. And like the issue, there's a lot of stuff going on the internet that I'd like to speak. I don't know. It's like, do I want to speak up against certain things, or do I want to avoid it with a 10-foot pole and just not have that contaminate my sacred space? You know what I'm saying? Because there's another kind of, I can kind of see, even though the people that do decide to go completely apolitical or try to leave that out, then I can kind of sympathize with that to a degree, and that, like, maybe instead of just starting a vlog and recording something and just talking a bunch of shit, or like maybe I should also filter out my language like this, right? To purify out my my language and screen out my controversial opinions and all this kind of thing, and just do something that's more new, like it's be the equivalent. It's like, what do you want for breakfast? Do you want a bowl of cornflakes, just bland milk and cornflakes, or do you want to have like a maybe like an omelet with some hot sauce on it, some hot chili peppers, and some, you spice it up a bit, right? And that's kind of like it's like, there's an issue though, I think, that with the cornflakes is a good example, because they had this idea of purity, right? There was actually kind of, cornflakes are invented, this idea that for helping sick people in asylums, that they need to restore the state of purity and innocence, so we're going to just feed them really bland food like cornflakes and try to prevent them from eating spicy things or something. But there's, realize there's kind of a coding where, like, who are the people that like spicy food? It's usually people like Indian people and Mexican people and stuff like this, and there's this kind of, it's almost like we have this, it's weird. You notice this weird thing where, like, there's certain, like, white people, like, the whiter, the more racist they are, the more they can't handle spicy food or something like this, right? And there's, I don't know if that's a connection or not, or if it's just like a, if there's a causal relation or something, right? But there's something that there's something about the Mars and Neptune. I don't know if again, this is, if it's controversial, if it's appropriate, but there's these things like the idea of the white person who can't stand or can't tolerate spicy food, or the idea of a kind of a fragrance or a odor or something that is seen as being offensive, or people are judged against or something, or the idea of purity, or in a sense of wanting to keep something pure and being hypersensitive to whatever it is that could agitate that kind of purity and stuff like this. And this is the thing, the problem though is that you can see it though, on one hand, where there's all the problems of the damn Nazis and fascists and the people who are all uptight against anybody who's different from them, or the, the ethnic tribalism and all this kind of stuff. On the other hand though, there's this whole thing about the left has become, with the left wing and the woke stuff, which is, I think, I want to, on one hand, say that I'm not, like, the woke stuff is, there's a point though where a lot of the people who are anti-woke, like, like the Dilbert comic guy, it's like, he sounds like he's just, like, there are people who just literally, like, they're anti-woke because they are racist, or that they are sex offenders. Like, the whole thing about, like, people, like, the wokeness, anti-woke being, like, almost like a reaction to things like the Me Too movement. Well, there's no controversy about stuff like Harvey Weinstein, or Epstein, or Bill Cosby, or any of these guys. Like, there's nothing about, like, the idea that, like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't abuse people wholesale. Like, it's not a controversial issue. It's not, there's nothing, or like the idea of, so if you're doing basic principles of treating women like human beings, or basically the principles of treating black people like human beings, like, and not subjugate them to a system of, where they're just slaughtered like animals on the street. I mean, this is all should be non-controversial stuff, I should say, right? So, on that, before I make any criticism of woke culture, let's just be straight that I think at the basic level, like, I am completely in support of, like, whatever, Black Lives Matter and trans people at this level of, like, yeah, can we not kill these people? Can we include these people in our society and listen to, and, there's all these subtleties to the problem which are more complicated than that, but at the basic level, it shouldn't really be that controversial, right? And I honestly think that maybe it's better to stay out of politics, because there's something about it that I intuit that the truth, the way things really are, is actually not so complicated, but there's so much of investment in the bullshit factor. This is why bringing up the bullshit factor of the 6 months of Mars and Gemini is, and I'm not even suggesting that I'm clear of the bullshit. I probably have enough of my own bullshit as well, right? But there's, at some point in time, the thing about this 10th decan, or whatever it is, the 3rd decan of Gemini, the 3rd decan of Pisces, and we're going through this long process of the certain transit of we're talking about these two right now, Mars and Neptune, in my video today, that it comes, the basic simple thing in astrology of beginnings and endings and cycles and completions and all this, right? We're going to be, this is a larger thing, we're going to be having the Saturn and Neptune thing, and we're going to be having it ingress into Aries and stuff like that, and then you're going to have your Neptune and Mars, stuff going on with that one, over the next few years. We're going to be seeing that, but the we're in this kind of moment. There's a shift taking place. There's something happening, and I feel like we've become hypersensitive. It's like, especially this idea, like the person who's eating their cornflakes and they don't want their Tabasco sauce in their cornflakes, right? So they're super hypersensitive, and anything, like if the milk is just the slightest bit off or something, they can taste it. Everything, they're like this. The Princess and the Pea is another. It's a fairy tale story, right? Where the princess is on a bed, and they have all these layers of mattresses, but they can still tell there's a little pea at the bottom of the mattress. There's a fairy tale story. Remember that one? That's another that goes with the Mars Neptune. And I have to admit that even if I acknowledge the basic agreement, I'm like defense of the basic, what I see as the woke thing of let's stand up for some minorities who've been impressed by the dominant, whatever patriarchal white supremacist thing. And there's, even if you stand up for that, there's something about like even like the whole thing about the dog whistle, right? Which is like there's something, it's really how, rather than there's something. I watched this movie for the first time recently. It was Ran by Akira Kurosawa. I think it's actually based off King Lear. But it was on streaming. I'm gonna watch it on the streaming, and there's this amazing scene. Like for me, the highlight of this film, where it really climaxes, is that there's a scene where there's this guy who plays an instrument. I think it's like a flute, right? And this context is that the guy playing the flute, his family had been killed. Basically, I'm not that up on, if I can follow the plot, so with all the details. But the basic gist is that it's like a Game of Thrones situation. Basically, they have a feudal kind of situation, and that this guy is entertaining the lord who's rules over the kingdoms, and at some point in the past there was some battles, and that he conquered these territories, and this is a guy who's from the family of one of the conquered territories, right? So there's a basic power balance where the guy in power and the subjugated person, and in this power balance, it's a wonderful scene, because that if you created this situation, there's this power balance. You're not the guy can't say shit to the guy who is the supreme, whatever, the lord who's conquered all these territories, the big man who's won, who's exerted his will, who's the big man and boss. This guy, the guy who's subjugated, and then there's also the woman too. There's the woman who's the wife, who's of a family, who's had her, she doesn't want to be in this agreement with this family at all. She's just doing this as, she's got her back up to the wall, basically, and she doesn't have any sympathy for this family, and she's ready to just turn on them and stab them in the back. I don't want to give away the plot too much, but this is, it's based on King Lear. There's no spoilers, right? So, like, people should, as if, whatever, the basic principles of doing these kind of things that I'm talking about the plot. I'll maybe say including spoilers for this movie in the description if I have to. But the point, though, is that in the scene of the people that have been subjugated under the power structure, they can either plot in secret their revenge, or they can just not express their oppression or whatever. But there's a scene where the guy plays the flute, right? And the guy, if you think about all the repressions that this guy must have of what he can't express about to this guy who's dominated him in this Game of Thrones kind of situation, and without even saying anything, to just play on his flute, it comes out so sharp that it just, the guy, the feudal lord is goes mad at the sound of this flute, that the flute just pierces his heart with like everything that this guy can't say is just there in a bolt, like a bullet, like in an instant in this flute. And it's just like, you don't even have to put it into words, that the feudal lord just is like scared for his life, paranoid, like he knows that his like he's gonna have to pay the piper, basically. Maybe that's a pun on it because of the piper, but it's a beautiful, it's an intense scene, because the guy hasn't even made a threat. The guy hasn't even made a plan. The guy hasn't even and yet the guy, just to play a note on your flute and strike fear into the heart of the enemy like that without even meaning to, because it's just in the context, the meaning of the situation, right? And there's something about the uncomfortability about these kinds of problems. I think the Mars Neptune really is, it's like, there's certain things, there's certain moments where this whole thing about, censorship, that people, free speech, I think with Mars and Gemini, that you realize the speech and what you can do with language, at some point in time, it's kind of a load of bullshit. Or if you want to at least rise above the level of bullshit, you have to work on it. You have to work on your idea. You have to work on what you're saying. You have to work on your argument. You have to, you have to refine it, right? And at least if you have, with a lot of this energy, you have you have an opportunity to refine it maybe a bit. But there's a certain issue about it where at some point in time, you realize that there's only so much that can be said. But there's some kind of a truth there. This is what I'm getting at, that there's a truth that even if this whole complaint that against free speech in our society, that we need to be completely free, that we can't you can't be authentic, to be authentic to the oppressor, the guy would just say, I'm taking back my manhood, fuck you, or something like this, and to be a big man about it. The guy doesn't need to do that. He just plays his flute, and then boom, that would be, you can't walk away from it. It's something that is, what I'm trying to say, there's something about like The Princess and the Pea, whereas like if you try to like have a complete control on the situation, there's always going to be that one irreducible thing, right? That one thing that you cannot silence, that you cannot control, that you cannot put under a grip of your iron logic and to make work for you, to achieve your goals, to get all the things you want, to maintain there's this one wild card factor that is also just this truth, this wild, frisky, untamable truth that you don't even have to worry about whatever. There's something about a good example of this is that I don't want to, again, I'm not completely, what am I going to try to say? There's these Russian prison songs, basically, right? Of people who are in the gulags, and if you look, there's this one song that translates to something like "Mama, I'm not coming home." It's like the gulag, but there's something where if you don't even speak Russian, right? There's something about the sentiment in this song that just cuts to the bone. Basically, it's pretty brutal. It's like they're like. There's something, I think that's in the Mars and Neptune, is that sometimes this, like, people associate silence with a kind of a quietude that is like silence is peace necessarily, or that but there's something about silence could just be the opening up a space to listen to be receptive to what's there. Right? To hear what's coming up, and that, the whole stillness and silence isn't to wash off behind a wall of noise where we're unconscious and dazed and confused, that the silence clarifies things. It brings things into focus, into clarity, where you can see what's happening. And that the thing is the stillness and the silence, when the person plays his flute, it's not, the stillness and the silence isn't gonna protect you from that note that's in the flute. On the contrary, the stillness and the silence is going to expose you to that vulnerability even more. It's not going to, if you were going to be driven insane by that note, then do not seek comfort in the stillness and the silence. It's not there to protect you. And that's my, I don't know, that's the most I can say, just organically trying to work with this Mars-Neptune conjunction, whatever or comes up, trying to express whatever it is. Okay, hopefully you like this one.